There are records in 47 different cultures that describe the same cataclysm with geological precision. It is no coincidence. It is the trace of a civilization that someone decided to erase from history forever. The Bible covers 17 centuries of human history with just a few verses, and no one asks why. Imagine someone from the future summarizing our entire era from electricity to the internet in 3 lines. All our science, our empires, and discoveries were reduced to 3 paragraphs without explanation. That is exactly what happened in the 17 centuries before the flood, and it was not by accident. The question that theologians avoid, archaeologists ignore, and historians fear is the simplest of all. What did humanity discover in those centuries that was so dangerous that God chose to erase it along with all flesh? The answer begins in 4 verses from Genesis that almost no one reads with the attention they truly deserve. Genesis 4, verse 17, Cain knew his wife. She conceived, and he built an entire city. Cain, the first murderer, condemned to wander the earth, not only survives, but also builds a metropolis. How did a cursed fugitive obtain resources, labor, and knowledge to build a city from scratch? This contradiction has been buried in the text for centuries, and what it conceals is the first great revelation in history. The following genealogy is not a list of names. It is the curriculum of the first known industrial revolution. Jabal, son of Lamech, was the father of those who lived in tents and had livestock, the text states without further detail. But in Hebrew, tents refer to sophisticated mobile structures designed for communities on the move. Jabal did not invent the primitive campsite. He developed the first recorded portable housing engineering. His brother Jubal was the father of those who play the harp and the flute, according to that same chapter of the ancient Genesis. The Hebrew words for harp and flute indicate complex instruments with precise tuning and elaborate construction. Jubal did not invent campfire music. He understood frequencies, resonance, and harmonics with astonishing precision. Music in ancient cultures was not entertainment. It was spiritual technology to access other dimensions. Jubal created the first interface between the natural world and the supernatural, using only sound and vibration. But what follows in the genealogy of Cain is what should stop us in our tracks and make us reflect. Genesis 4 indicates that Tubal-Cain was a master of all works in bronze and iron, 2 metals that should not coexist. Conventional archaeology claims that copper precedes iron by centuries, but Tubal-Cain mastered both at the same time. The Hebrew word for teacher is latash, which means one who sharpens, cuts, and shapes materials with technical precision. Tubal-Cain was not a blacksmith. He was a metallurgical engineer who understood temperatures, pressures, and chemical alloys. How could a supposedly primitive civilization master 2 metallurgies typically separated by long millennia? If Cain's descendants mastered urban planning, acoustics, and metallurgy in 7 generations, everything changes. What did they manage to do with that knowledge in the 15 centuries that followed those first generations? Why did God let technology emerge from the lineage of the murderer instead of from the righteous Seth's line? The answer is buried in the land of Nod, a place that Genesis mentions only once, but explains everything. When the Bible says that Cain went to the land of Nod, east of Eden, something fundamental escapes a quick reading. Nod already had a name, it already existed, it was already populated, and it had its own history before Cain set foot there. How can there be a place with a name, with a population, and with resources if humanity was just beginning at that very moment? What if the woman Cain found in Nod brought knowledge that he could never have developed on his own? More than 200 ancient traditions speak of celestial beings who taught technology directly to humans. Sumerians, Egyptians, Greeks, Mayans, and Incas tell the same story, with details that could not be known separately. Genesis 6 confirms it. The sons of God took wives from the daughters of men, a forbidden and devastating union. But that verse is chronologically later than the foundation of Enoch, which raises a question that leaves one stunned. What if the children of God were already on earth long before that verse, and intervened here from the very beginning? This would explain why Cain, a cursed fugitive, was able to found an entire city almost immediately after leaving Eden. This explains why their descendants mastered technologies that archaeology suggests shouldn't have appeared for centuries. And I would explain why the lineage of Cain technologically surpassed that of the righteous Seth in just a few generations. But to understand what came next, one must know the forbidden history of the official canon of the scriptures. The Book of Enoch, revered by Jewish communities and early Christians for centuries, reveals what the Bible only hints at. According to that text, 200 angels descended from heaven in ancient times by their own decision, without being sent by God. Led by Semyaza, they swore on Mount Hermon to take human women and reveal to them forbidden secrets. The text narrates that some doubted, and Semyaza warned that perhaps only he would bear the punishment for that transgression. But everyone responded with a sealed oath that none would back down, and human history changed forever. What they came to teach was not worship, but the forbidden technology that transforms and corrupts civilizations. Azazel taught how to forge weapons, work with precious metals, and transform common minerals into unprecedented military power. Remember Tubal-Cain and his mastery of copper and iron. Now you know who truly passed that precise knowledge to him. Semyaza taught enchantments and hidden formulas, arts that opened doors between the visible world and the spiritual plane. Barakel revealed the secrets of astrology. Kokabel taught the signs of the stars and the power that resides in them. Penemu showed the arts of writing and the manipulation of symbols to control the thoughts of human masses. Sariel taught the movements of the moon and the control of natural cycles, an unparalleled power over life itself. Each teacher brought knowledge that seemed liberating, but actually concealed a prison for all humanity. From the union between those beings and human women were born creatures that should never have existed on this earth, the Nephilim. They were giants of enormous stature with supernatural intelligence and an insatiable appetite that knew no compassion. The Book of Enoch describes them devouring the work of men until they could no longer sustain or feed them. And when the fields were not enough, the Nephilim turned against the men themselves to devour them. They became predators of humanity. The very beings that were meant to be teachers ended up being its executioners. Now imagine everything that the lineage of Cain had developed multiplied by the direct teaching of the Watchers. Humanity was not evolving. It was skipping entire stages, decades of progress condensed into a single generation thanks to them. In a few generations there existed astronomy, advanced metallurgy, the arts of war, and the first genetic manipulation. It was like giving nuclear technology to a civilization that was just learning to plant wheat in freshly cleared fields. They were cosmic secrets in the hands of men who were still learning to tame animals and cultivate the first grains. But the teachers did not go unpunished. The faithful angels presented themselves before God and cried out for the state of creation. Miguel, Gabriel, and Raphael said the earth groans, and all that the watchers have taught is corrupting creation. And the final sentence arrived. The watchers would be chained in dark abysses, awaiting the eternal judgment. Semiaza and his companions were imprisoned beneath the mountains, sealed with eternal chains with no possibility of return. The flood would destroy the Nephilim, drowning them in waters that would erase all evidence of their existence on earth. But even chained, the damage was already done. Knowledge had been set free, and humanity could not take it back. All ancient cultures of the world speak of gods who came down from the sky and taught their secrets to men. The Sumerians called them Anunnaki, the Egyptians referred to them as Neteru, and the Greeks knew them as the most rebellious titans. The native peoples of America spoke of birdmen, and all these stories point to the same original source. They were not different gods. It was the same event narrated from different shores of the world before writing existed. And what they built with that knowledge during the 17 lost centuries today defies all rational explanation. Gigantic megaliths rose with astronomical precision that no modern engineer has ever been able to explain. Pyramids, ziggurats, and temples oriented with millimetric precision towards specific stars emerged all over the planet. Blocks weighing hundreds of tons, cut with precision, were transported for kilometers without wheels or known machinery. Even with all our current technology, we still cannot explain how many of those monuments were built. Civilizations that the academic manual calls primitive possessed engineering that surpasses ours in key aspects. But the Guardians not only taught how to lift stones, they brought knowledge about genetics and species hybridization. The Book of Enoch suggests that the Nephilim experimented with forbidden crossings between different forms of life on Earth. Men mixed with animals emerged, hybrid creatures that filled the earth with unprecedented aberrations. Ancient peoples remember centaurs, minotaurs, and scorpion men. Are they myths or memories of real experiments? Today, humanity edits DNA with precision and can create hybrid embryos between humans and animals in a full laboratory. If we accomplished this in decades, what stops a civilization with celestial guidance from doing it thousands of years ago? These teachers also taught the control of climatic phenomena and the cyclical movements of the stars in the sky. Sumerian traditions and the Book of Enoch speak of portals between dimensions, places where heaven touched the earth. The ziggurats were called gates of the gods, and the word Babel, in its etymological root, means gate to the divine. It was not a metaphor. It was spiritual technology, temples and formulas that opened gaps in the very fabric of reality. All subsequent attempts to build towers and temples to invoke gods are echoes of that same forgotten science. Those 17 centuries were not just cultural growth. They were such a great leap that God could not ignore it. All of that was advanced engineering, genetic manipulation, dimensional portals, and weapons in the hands of men without morals. We, with all our modern science, have still not achieved everything that civilization from before the flood already possessed. That explains why Göbekli Tepe, the pyramids of Giza, and Stonehenge remain unanswered mysteries for science. This explains why all mythologies narrate the same giant things: gods, hybrids, and global cataclysms. They were not legends. They were the fragmented memory of a real civilization, a civilization that was forbidden and then erased. However, there was a greater problem than simple human wickedness. That technology threatened God's eternal plan. If all the flesh were genetically contaminated, there would be no pure lineage for the birth of the Messiah promised since Eden. The promise of a Savior made in the Garden of Eden was at risk of being destroyed by the corruption of the Watchers. That is why Genesis 6 says that God looked at the earth and saw that all flesh had corrupted its way, not just morally. It was not just violence or idolatry. It was an attack on the original design that God laid out for His creation and for history. The Book of Enoch describes how men cried out to the heavens, unable to endure the insatiable tyranny of the giants. The Nephilim devastated fields, destroyed cities, and turned the planet into a vast field of blood without hope. The faithful angels brought the outcry before God, and the sentence was as definitive as the corruption that had caused it. The Watchers were the first chained in lightless abysses until the day of final judgment, with no possible redemption. Later, against the Nephilim, the flood would take care of erasing each of their steps from the entire surface of the earth. God then looked at all of humanity and found a single man who remained upright amidst so much widespread corruption. Noah was perfect in his generation, and the Hebrew term toledot refers not only to morality, but also to pure genetic lineage. Noah was not only spiritually righteous, he was genetically pure, without any contamination from the Watchers in his lineage. He was chosen not only for his goodness, but because he was the only guarantee that God's messianic plan would not be destroyed. Before the waters, God decreed the extinction of an entire civilization. Cities, temples, and technologies had to disappear. The flood was not just a punishment, it was a total reset of history, a cosmic surgery on a creation already infected. Imagine the men watching as the skies darkened over the most powerful cities they had ever known. Unseen clouds appeared, thunder that toppled megaliths, lightning that illuminated entire cities in an instant. The giants, in their limitless arrogance, perhaps mocked, convinced that nothing in the cosmos could destroy them. When the springs of the abyss broke and the gates of heaven opened, there was no human power that could withstand it. The temples were swallowed by the mud, the megaliths fell like toys, the hybrids struggled to survive in vain. There were priests crying out to gods who never answered, while entire cities were swallowed by water in hours. And in the midst of that horror, only one family remained safe inside a wooden ark at the end of the world. The waters prevailed for 150 days over the earth, almost 5 months of the planet submerged in absolute silence. Without cities, without monuments, without hybrid beings, all the antediluvian glory was buried under tons of mud. The men who survived the flood carried with them fragments of the memory of that era that they could never forget. That is why every culture in the world has myths about great floods, giants who perished, and gods imprisoned in abysses. Each village kept fragments of that truth as collective echoes of an erased past, but never entirely forgotten by anyone. The lesson was clear. When humanity tries to be like gods without God, the result is always total destruction. When the waters receded and the ark rested on the mountains of Ararat, one era had ended and another was beginning. They were restarting human history, as if God were saying, forget the past and begin with true worship. When Noah exited the ark, he didn't build a city or palace, but instead built an altar to the Lord. While Cain built a city as his first act, Noah built an altar, and in that difference lies the entire message. One civilization began with technology, the other with worship, and that difference determined which one deserved to continue. It was then that God established a covenant and sealed it with a sign that the whole world recognizes without understanding its weight. Never again will all flesh be destroyed by the waters of the flood, says Genesis 9, verse 11, with total clarity. And he set the rainbow in the skies as a sign of that covenant, not as a mere ornament, but as an eternal and solemn reminder. Note the detail few notice. The pact promised no reset would occur again, except through water. He didn't promise to never intervene again, only that the next judgment wouldn't come through floodwaters. And here is the connection that changes everything. Jesus warned that the end of times would be like in the days of Noah. This means that before the end, there will be genetic corruption, extreme violence, and contact with entities from the spiritual world. Today we edit DNA, clone beings, and build intelligences that learn on their own, surpassing humans in everything. We manipulate the climate, build digital portals that connect the world, and explore what exists beyond the planet. We do exactly what the Watchers taught, and we call it progress without considering the price we will pay for it. Why did God erase the traces of that civilization if he could have preserved monuments as an eternal testament? Maybe because if we had access to that science, we would fall into exactly the same mistakes that led to the reset. Perhaps because humanity would not resist the temptation to repeat the sin of the Watchers if it knew how to achieve it. That's why we look at Göbekli Tepe, Stonehenge, and the pyramids and feel that something in the official chronology just doesn't fit. We feel that something was hidden, that the pieces don't fit. But we don't have all the fragments of the complete puzzle. And here is the parallelism that no one in academia dares to point out in full, and its real consequences. Just as God restarted the ancient world, Jesus warned that the end will be like in the days of Noah. And that is not just poetry. A technical warning states that before the end, there will be hybridization, tech idolatry, and spiritual entities present. Scientists are already discussing the creation of human-animal hybrid embryos and editing the genes of babies before they are born. We have already built artificial intelligences that learn on their own and in specific areas far exceed the human mind. We explore space in search of other beings, while modifying genes, cloning, and rewriting the definition of life. We are not repeating history. We are completing it with the same arrogance that destroyed the world before the flood. And here is the final revelation. The 17 centuries were not hidden to keep us ignorant, but to protect us. The silence of the Bible is a cry that warns we are not prepared to know how far we can go without God. The fragments in myths, ruins, and ancient records are there as an eternal reminder of what we were once capable of doing. We have done it before as a global civilization, and the end was not glory nor progress. It was total destruction. The rainbow in the skies is simultaneously a sign of promise and a permanent reminder of a boundary that has a name. God is patient but not indefinitely, and that rainbow reminds us every time it rains that there was a moment when he said, "Enough." Now you know God did not erase 17 centuries to deprive us. He erased them to protect us from ourselves. If we had access to that science, we would do what they did and undoubtedly reach the same inevitable result. The civilization of Cain began with a city without God. The Watchers brought forbidden knowledge from above. The Nephilim corrupted all flesh, and the entire world had to be reset amidst waters that covered everything. Noah built an altar, and from the ark emerged a new humanity, a second chance that no one deserved, but God granted. The difference between the two civilizations was not intelligence or technology. It was the orientation of the heart that drove them. One pointed to technology as her god, the other pointed to the Creator as her foundation, and that single choice determined everything. Those 17 lost centuries are not just ancient history. They are an active prophecy that speaks to our present time. They serve as a warning and a mirror, reflecting today's reality for those who can read the signs with total honesty. The rainbow in the sky shines on, reminding us that God kept his promise not to destroy the earth with water again. The promise didn't guarantee no future judgment, only that water wouldn't be the means of the next major intervention. As it was in the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Jesus warned it with a precision that leaves no room for doubt. Connect everything you have seen: the city of Cain, the Watchers, the Nephilim, the flood, the ark, the rainbow, and this era. The cycle that began with Adam is about to close, and the signs that Jesus described are the news of every morning. The Watchers called their teaching liberation, and humanity called it progress, until the waters came and everything ended. The story was not erased by chance. It is about to repeat itself with different tools, but the same fatal logic. When the next trial comes, the question that matters will not be how much technology you accumulated, but in what you placed your faith. The 17 lost centuries are not just buried history. They are the most urgent message that God left for this generation. God does not restore what is completely corrupted. He erases it and recreates it, and this time the only ark is called Christ. If this truth left you pondering, subscribe to continue uncovering the mysteries that history buried centuries ago.